So first I need to know regarding like UM2. Can you send your speaker position in the chat? Because I haven't got it yet. And then can you also send your ranking, your motion ranking in the chat so that the educators could take a look of what you preferred and what you vetoed. All right. So, okay. So the motion is correct, right?
Yes,
all good. All right. So if all good, I'll start the round right now. So everyone ready? All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the round 3 of Royal 2024. My name is Anwar bin Azman, and I'll be the speaker for this round. So the chair for this round will be Madam Suraya, Madam Yontam, and Wern. You may refer to them as a panel. So first, I will introduce the speaker for both government and opposition. So from Ministry of Malaya, we have Chloe. After that, we have Vignesh as our Deputy Prime Minister. And for General Government Whip, we'll be having Neo Paris. And from Ministry of Technology Mara as the opposition, we have Leader of Opposition will be Aisha. Deputy Leader of Opposition will be Isan, and the Opposition Whip will be Adam. So before we start, I would like to give a few general reminders for the debaters. Please remember to state your preferred PRI method, whether we like to receive your PRI verbally by voice, or if you prefer your PRI to be done in chat. Debaters must be aware of the preferred PRI method when asking for PRI. Please be mindful of what you use in the debate, and please be respectful to each other to avoid equity consent. We would appreciate if the speaker are able to conduct themselves professionally to ensure the debate progresses smoothly. Lastly, please be aware of the time of your speech. The timekeeper will keep the time to your speech, but it's also important for the speaker to time themselves in case of any issues. So again, I would like to iterate regarding the motion. So the motion for this round reads, this House would ban cultural appropriation in fashion and entertainment. So everyone ready? I would like to invite the Prime Minister to deliver the speech. Here. So can I get the Prime Minister? Are you ready?
Yeah, ready, but give us a second.
I believe the Prime Minister from UM. So, yeah.
Am I visible and audible?
Oh, yes. Right. Okay. So if you're ready, you just let me know from the count of 3.
Yeah, I'll say it when I'm ready.
Yes, good.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Cultural appropriation is theft, and it can only be ever deemed as drawing awareness if it is done by the people themselves. 4 layers of framing. Number 1, what this culture means to people. I think the priority is always to preserve it. It's always to bring forward to their future generations and ensure that it is not capitalized by outsiders. Now, this can be seen since like colonial times, where like the British told like the Malays to like go work for them in those places where they had to leave their families, leave everything that they know about their lives, but they said no because they wanted to stay with their lives and stay with the habits and all of those practices that they preserved since. Now, the is always deeper than financial gain. So opposition cannot come up here and tell us that, hey, oh, if cultural appropriation happens, then these people are going to get money and all. But I think that is not the main intention of what these people actually want in the very first place. And also number two, why culture is pure. I will be talking about this later on in my argument, but just briefly that I think culture is pure because these are like semblances of what people actually have known ever since since their birth. And these things cannot be taken away or at least even deemed as altered by other people outside their cultures. Because number one, it is obviously intuitively very wrong. And number two, if not done well, it can be misrepresented and those people can use those things against people of the very own culture then. Now, a line has to be drawn here. And in status quo, maybe you can say, oh, there's already a line between awareness, appreciation, appropriation, and all. But I think that line should be made thicker. It should be made so that people understand and respect that any point in which the people of those minorities deem something as cultural appropriation, they have to stop. That line between all of those semblances has to be made clear. And in the case where worst case scenario, sure, if it takes a bit longer to like draw the line to make sure everyone understands, we take the stance that it has to be done. As long as it is done, we believe that it should be thrown out then. Later, I'll take you, Adam. Number three, other avenues exist as well. People from their own cultures can be able to use this to access fashion and entertainment. But even in the worst case, where you want to bar these people from even using them in fashion and entertainment, I think economic upliftment can be achieved through other things as well. For example, marginalized communities can be allowed access through, or like even exposure through like creative control and namesakes and spaces to speak up, through which I will explain later further on as well. People from these own communities, they are the ones who actually should have access to this. And in the worst case scenario where you want to bar these people from using their own cultures entirely, we think other avenues still do exist. Now, like for example, like platform culture on social media, such as awareness, or like even the most basic appreciation weeks that you see in university events. Now, my fourth piece of framing here that fashion and entertainment is an extremely exploitative and toxic industry. This is seen in the asymmetrical powers that you see between employers, where if any employee doesn't want to do something or they have a different opinion, it's going to be seen as going against the employer. And therefore, they're going to be laid off. They're going to be barred from seeking out any other work because like these people have all like the cables to threaten them and say, hey, if you don't do this, you're not going to be able to find any other job within that industry. So these employees have no choice but only to conform to all of these unfair things that happen to them. Yes, I'll take you.
Yeah, this motion implies that there are high levels of cultural appropriation. Why do you think it happens? Why can't appreciation happen in the first place?
I think appreciation and appropriation both exist at the same time, but there is a very thin line existing in status quo. What we want to do here is to make the difference greater. We want people to recognize that appreciation, when done wrongly or done even without the knowledge or like recognition that is needed from these people of those minority cultures, it can be done extremely badly and to lead to the sense where it's deemed as appropriation, because when it's commodified, when it's deemed as exotic, it leads to a lot of altered versions of it where it's exaggerated, and those optics are controlled by people that do not belong to those cultures, and it's extremely toxic as well. Arguments that, number one, it promotes cultural sensitivity. Now, what I mean by culture being pure is that people have these traditions since a very long time. And it's also things that are spiritually tied to their culture souls and things that have been like long-standing in their traditions as well. It's passed down from generation to generation. And it's always preserved. Like, for example, you can see in like Rumah Panjang in Sarawak, kolam making during Deepavali, and where people want the purest forms to be passed down, these people do not want alterations to exist. So even if you say that when you follow those practices since your great-grandparents, where you're not wearing black, you're not wearing a slitted cheongsam, in the case where you want to wear an altered slitted cheongsam, I think it should be up to these people who actually even want to make those alterations. So at least it's according to their own metric. It's at least according to the amount that they control. Then I also think number two, these co-opting of like this culture into fashion and entertainment will only lead to the bastardization of the cultures. What I mean then, I think this means that people who always want to like opt into this fashion and entertainment, obviously they want people to buy into the things that they're selling. So of course, they're always going to cater to the majority, where there's always going to be like liberal campaigns where like, oh, you're going to want to be able to show more skin. Therefore, they're going to force people to like, if you're making a sari, of course, you're going to have show more skin. I think those things are extremely detrimental to culture themselves. And these individuals outside of those cultures are going to see these costumes, see these as dress up, where people can just wear my culture's cheongsam and say, oh, I'm just dressing up because I think it's cute and fun and sexy. I think it's extremely detrimental, and it's also sexualizing the culture that I deem so important and something that I want to preserve so purely, and I should want to protect all of these things as well. I think most importantly, my last argument here today is that how these individuals of those cultures want to receive that reception from the public. That I think people's perception of clothing and food culture is based on the industry statement. So what we want to do is that we do not want the industry to be able to control that statement, to be able to control the perception or the opinion of how people view these cultures, and where cultural appropriation should not be done, because it will only restrict a lot of the reins of how people allow their culture to be shown. But at least in our world, at least these people can comfortably preserve it as intended. Panel, most importantly today, I think that fashion and entertainment, where it's extremely profitable, where it relies on people creativity, where people just steal away anything that they deem as creative or fresh or new just for the sake of money, it's extremely detrimental and should not be something that is deemed good for cultures as well.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for that speech. Now, I would like to invite Leader of Opposition to deliver the speech. So if you're ready, just let me know. I'm going to count on 3.
Hello. Oh. Okay, sorry. Sorry, my speech in 3, 2, 1. The extinction of culture is not rooted by appropriation. It is threatened by silencing cultural exchange and creative collaboration, which is exactly the crux of Gov's case. What are we going to offer to you in our speech? First things first, let's just get it over with the rebuttals. I have 2 rebuttals to forward to you, Judge. The first here is, let's just question the strategy coming from government. They say that the whole premise that they want to defend is on cultural preservation. Note number 1, this doesn't fulfill their burden as to how they would justify this into a ban. But number 2, on an intuitive layer, right? Why is this even strategic in the first place? If you want to preserve culture, you have to justify why imposing a blanket ban and isolating people from engaging in discourses in the very first place is something that's valuable. But number 2, we think Gov has just concocted a very disproportionate response in the very first place. Their biggest problem here was the misrepresentation that occurs towards culture. Their analysis to this is eventually we'll have better regulations, better dialogues to discern blurred lines when it comes to cultural engagement. We think this does not fulfill their burden as to why a ban is necessitated in the very first place. But sure, a POI, I'll take one.
We literally just explained to you why at the point of which is toxic fashion industry bastardizes culture is something that's harmful.
My volume was...
Oh, sorry. Chloe literally explained to you why the fashion industry, being one that is extremely toxic, is bastardization of culture, and why that is one that is harmful. Are you okay with that bastardization happening?
So we are going to do trade-offs in this debate. So we are saying that we are fine with that if that means that gives the ability for such cultures to be platformed in the very first place, which is my first argumentation that I'll forward. First things first is on the cultural inclusion and why this engages directly with the context of this debate, which is fashion and entertainment in industries. First problem here is to note how there's a vague interpretation of appropriation, which challenges the enforcement of bans that they want to impose in the very first place. We think what this creates is a looming fear to integrate designs, for instance, or just to platform such parts of culture, because there is a fear of social correctness that if you do this wrong, then you are completely disincentivized from participating in the very first place. We think this is especially harmful to its fashion and entertainment industries, because this is literally an industry that operates based on creativity, which ultimately has a ceiling. You want to have the ability for you to borrow parts of culture to platform it in the very first place. But secondly, then, let's analyze the MAC that you have in Gov. We think number one, it is a visible label in the term that it will strongly disincentivize people from having discourses about that. But number two, it emboldens the hostility. What it creates is an environment which isolates cultures and conversations in the very first place. How do we bridge this gap then? The first here is that we allow degrees of cultural appropriation to exist, because this is what allows entry point for individuals to permeate into cultures. What does this look like? This looks like allowing people to just understand that wearing shipaos is something that's celebratory in the very first place. Even when you feel like the way that they're wearing it is wrong, what it kickstarts is a conversation on how you're able to wear it. And the reason why this is completely different from Gov is because this policing does not translate into people not wanting to celebrate it in the very first place. But number two, what we create is a shift of discourse in celebrating culture. How does this inclusive dialogue look like? It is the acceptance that seeing Eminem rap, although the rap industry is something that's very prominent towards African American, this ultimately platforms the culture for it to be integrated in the mainstream music at the end of the day. That's why you have many Black artists being able to be independent by themselves, because their pathway within the entertainment industry is a byproduct of leveraging off the majoritarian's capital in the very first place. Last but not least, it's just how we allow the normalization of diversity. We break cultural barriers because we agree that there are parts of the culture that we allow to be appropriated in the very first place. And that's why there's an acceptance of the cafe in the very first place. That's why we're okay with Mandarin collars being part of mainstream fashion in the very first place. That's exactly why people buy that shit in Uniqlo at the end of the day. Last but not least, just another example of how we integrated Japanese influences in the very first place. The fact that JPG literally integrated Japanese cultures on high fashion runways means that people were exposed to the visibility of how Japanese cultures ultimately look like in the very first place. So what this eventually allowed is the visibility of such cultures for people to be normalized, and that calculus in the very first place is what necessitates better interaction among intercultures then. What is the trade-off here? We can see that we are trading off a part of our culture, and sometimes this comes at the expense of profitization. But we feel that this is something that is short-term in comparison, because eventually we are able to attain a better pathway to give way for independent fashion designers that are Japanese ultimately. Because let's just consider other examples. When you have a movie about certain cultures, Crazy Rich Asians, for instance, the reason why we were able to have such great Asian representation in the very first place is we had casting members, despite being white, doing the field work, for example, to understand what is a Singaporean culture ultimately, how that melting pot of diversity ultimately manifests. And they have to represent that correctly in order for them to have a good movie ultimately. So what this conclusively proves is that it's untrue that when people profitize off your culture, they will be isolating you completely. We think that is a point of interaction where it creates a necessity to include these other forms of culture at the end of the day. What is the comparative harm that exists with Gov then? The first here is that in your world, ultimately, you will have majorities retaining the highest forms of capital. That means even if you're able to practice your own forms of cultures, the extent of benefits is only going to be limited towards people who are already practicing these cultures. That means you will never have the platforming of fashion shows or having TV airtime that is prime in the very first place to make your culture that's something that's valuable at the end of the day. But number two, we think it's just conceding to more hurdles. You either have to be a tokenistic, you have to be the prime representation of a minority for you to have access to wealth, to access like the amount of primary airtime that's important, so on and so forth. But number two, this also could mean that you have to convince the rest of majority that your culture is something that is worth platforming in the very first place. Last but not least, is just on terms of creative control, which we think is an important clash for us to contribute. We think at the end of the day, what Gov creates is closed practice. Maybe they have full control over like creativity when it comes to fashion and entertainment, but we think this comes at the expense of not allowing other people to truly appreciate this culture and giving it even a semblance of platforming in the greater society. For all these reasons, we are very proud to oppose.
Well, thank you, Leader of Opposition, for that speech. Now, I would like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to deliver the speech. So just let me know when you're ready on the count of three. Deputy Prime Minister, are you ready?
Sorry, yeah, am I visible and audible?
Okay, now you're visible.
Okay, thank you. Give me a second. Yeah. When the British offered the Malay people in Malaya a lot of economic leverage, but it came at the cost of the exchange with their culture, even though it came at the cost of being ostracized by the British who ruled, even though it came at the cost of staying and being restrained to the paddy fields in the kampong, the Malay people said no. Crucially, the inability to understand this from the side of opposition is the reason why they are going to lose today's debate. Because the point of culture is never to allow some other person who never shared that experience with you to enjoy culture. The point of culture is not to make money. The point of culture is not to the fullest extent visibility. Rather, it is the almost spiritual experience that you have with something that is passed down generation to generation. The failure of opposition to understand this is why they are losing in the first exchange. I have 3 layers of response before I go on with my case. Number one, I want to engage with the POI even further because Adam asked you, why? Why if it exists already, it is so hard to have appreciation over the ideas of like appropriation? And I think the simple response to this, beyond what Chloe just told you, is that it's preempted in framing. Chloe already tells you that the fashion and entertainment industry is one that is extremely exploitative, that tells 18-year-olds to sign asymmetrical contracts to enter into long-term programs with them, which is coercive in nature panel, and tells young people to do things that they don't want to do, which tells models that they'll be locked out of any form of access if they don't choose to buy into what they want them to do. This means that crucially, it answers the POI in that it isn't hard because we don't or do have a ban. Rather, that the nature of the industry as a whole is problematic, which is why we proposed the ban in the first place. Even if then, panel, we don't get the outcome that we want, we told you already from framing, we are perfectly fine with setting it off, insofar as we already proved to you that there are other avenues. No response to this coming from LO, the framing stands. The second thing that they then say is that there is discourse and that it can become better because Crazy Rich Asians and M&M. I want to note, panel, this is where funnily enough, the clearest line of cultural appreciation can be drawn. M&M was brought in by Dr. Dre, a renowned black artist. Crazy Rich Asian is directed and led by an all-Asian screenwriter, and like the director is literally Asian. But even if that is the case, I think that it's still not true that it leads to higher amounts of appreciation and discourse in a healthy manner. I think that it is untrue because it is particularly high burden for opposition to take this up on 2 key fronts. Number one, this is preconditioned on you being able to get majoritarian groups to agree with you and have discourse in an ability that they are not comfortable with them. Even if you're like the most woke white person in the US, you still face 2 like structural barriers to overcome this. Number one, the echo chambers that you exist within. Even if you get this piece and there's some level of discourse, the whiteness of your circle is always going to influence the conversations that you can and can't have. meaning these people are people that we say are lost cause to an extent when it comes to appreciating culture. But number two, the industry that shares this is not going to have an active incentive to communicate these things with these people. Maybe you get some minor level of discourse. They needed to prove why that's a tipping point towards an overall change. The third thing that they say is others can't appreciate the culture, so that's a net loss. I would immediately say that this is not meaningful and impact in the debate. If other people can't appreciate Indian culture, I don't see what's the relevance of that towards an Indian person. It's probably on weighing more relevant for you to know that your culture isn't being bastardized on the global scale by entertainment industries, that you're not seen as a commodity to be sold and sexualized, and that the people that once oppressed you aren't selling your culture and telling that's something that you should buy, and the money goes into their pockets. Why is Chloe's case winning? 3 reasons. Number one, let's weigh the framing. Understand that the first from Elos, the argument that comes from her speech is largely engaged by the framing of Chloe. When they talk about the shifting of discourse and appreciation, we tell you that you can access that via other non-exploitative avenues. You can assume fullest of agency to get these things in the first place. Or possibly, you can simply just not have the discourse or have the appreciation. We already predicated this in framing, no engagement towards that. It's not enough for them to just say that it doesn't matter. They need to meaningfully engage with the frame. It's too late for deputy leaders to do it. The second thing is we say is that by drawing a clear line, we're able to make greater distinctions in the band. The problem with status quo is it's very subjective in terms of whether or not appreciation is appreciation or appropriation. By drawing this line on a band, we place greater amounts of agency to the people whose culture that you're selling and modifying, and give greater amounts of avenues for them to express what they don't and want to do. Maybe it takes a very long time, panel, but insofar as the point of the social movements is never to get quick and easy revenues of access, rather it is ones that get justice to the fullest extent. We tell you that's a trade-off we're perfectly willing to take. Insofar as even if we need to consult hundreds of people, we are fine with doing that. Before I get into the 3 issues, POI.
Yeah, do you think the fashion industry and the entertainment industry is only on a per culture basis, or it's for everyone to enjoy?
The response to that is simple. Maybe it is on the culture basis. Maybe it is for everyone to enjoy. The tipping point for opposition to win is to prove that it's for everyone to enjoy. The point where that is true, you're burdened by a huge likelihood analysis of them pandering to the majoritarian groups who have more money and more access to resource, and are probably going to pander to them over actually representing the culture. Meaning when it comes down towards making a slated Cheongsam, even though it's a bastardization of Chinese culture, you will opt for the side that gives you greater amounts of money that is to bastardize the culture. That is why you needed to defend this occurring. LO didn't. That's another fallacy on the side of opposition. 3 issues. First, on the preservation of culture. They say culture will die if you do this ban. The reasoning is because of the fact that your conversations are isolated. Why is this untrue? I have 2 layers of positive substantive to insert into this. Number one, why you're unlikely to get the meaningful conversation that you want. Number one, because a lot of the times, this conversation is predicated on you actually having a great amount of experience within this culture. If you want to get this experience, you not only need to have an interaction with these people, but you also need to be in a situation whereby you do not have an asymmetry of information. Number 2, the fashion industry is the biggest controller of information within this narrative. If it's sold to you as this, you are likely to buy it for the same reason that white people watch white movies where they go to Asia and believe that that's how all Asian women are, and that's why we have passport bros these days. The second thing we talk about is why people get better appreciation on our side. Number one, because of the fact that appreciation via integration is likely going to get better amounts of outcome. Meaning the point where you're bringing people like Dr. Dre to bring in Eminem, which is what Aisha mentioned in her speech, is the point where people appreciate the nuance of a white person in the rap industry better. Number 2, because it's based on consensus. Maybe not everyone agrees with it, but it's much better than the comparative that opposites. Number 3, these are narratives that are led by that. When we offer these people the fullest amounts of agency, maybe they do make something that is apparently looking like a bastardization of culture. At the very least, they can explain it from their nuanced perspective. The second thing I want to talk about is likelihood. Why are we likely going to get people to buy into this? Number 1, the fashion industry is largely desperate. Western fashion is dying. Number 2, the potential monetary gain that they could get for this. The point where we force them to the table is the point where they will finally listen to us. Vote for the side of government.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for the speech. Now, I would like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to deliver the speech. So just let me know when you're ready on the count of 3.
All right, sure. Give me like 2 seconds. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. At the point that people do not engage in each other's culture is the point that they don't hear the stories that matter to them, since this is about an artist that they've never heard about anyway. This is the point in which there's no sharing and mixing aspects of the culture, since you don't have to care about them. They're on their own and we only have to care about ourselves. This is the point in which you never have any kind of unity under your side of the house, since people just have to alienate each other. The first step for you to have conversations and consent is for you to engage in culture, for you to understand why they do what they do. This means that there would only be sideline, and the only types of clothing that people would wear is only their generic H&M. What is the power in the word of blanket ban? Because this is something that they should have defended, but they've never did. Firstly, in the blanket ban, this means that you're telling the people that you should not touch us. And there's policing whenever the majority want to do a fashion show. This means that you tell people not to mingle and never try to imitate us, because you will have to pay if you do anything wrong. At the point of when policing happens is the point in which you crumble down any form of conversation that could happen between the cultures. This means that you tell people to remain in the in-groups and incentivize people to have discourse about them and attempt for you to understand to do what they do. The point where you expect people to have self-correction and can never work, since people are just deterred to talk to each other. Because if I do this, therefore I would just be squashed up. I would just have received summons, but I would never got the chance in order for me to correct myself and people to understand and for people to have discourse. But why does these certain things happen, and why is this particularly wrong? What is the difference between cultural appropriation and appreciation? I think government team never have clarified with that. And I think this is very problematic, because if they have clarified, because I'm just repeating what Chloe said in her first speech, is that there's a thin line between the two. Therefore, if the difference is not that huge, then they cannot claim the harms that they want, since both of this can happen at the same time. Cultural appropriation and appreciation can happen at the same time if it is not that different from each other. This means that when people who want to open businesses and record labels, sure, they would have to appropriate some form of culture in order for them to have a business to begin with, in order for them to make a song that people have never heard of. Therefore, people would want to make these cultures authentic. This is the point in which you're going to platform a lot more of local artists at this point in time. Or there's going to be a lot more of trickle-down effects, because you want to hire more minorities and making sure that they understand the lyrics in a song, making sure the listeners understand the lyric in a song and the instrument that you use in your music. If you want to make a song about Chinese, in Mandarin, or maybe have some mixture of between the two, you can have Chinese people, or maybe you can use the instruments that's used in traditional Chinese culture. At this point in time, we make sure that the authenticity of this experience can also be brought in, since you want all of this to be happen at the same time as well. Because if their case is about how there's going to be rap, like if their competitive is about rapping, I don't want to go into the rapping law. I think I will let Adam to deal with that. But the point in this argument is that if you make sure that people can still rap, and like make sure that some white people can still rap, I think when people can still rap, this is Vanilla Ice, I think what Adam said, is that when people platform with these cultures and people would understand more, and this is the point in which more people engages into this culture, they would also listen to artists like Tupac and Biggie after that. I have no one in my family wearing cheongsams or white. That's why I never understand why Indians wear dhoti or whatever they do. Because at least these cultures are, and outside the house, are more visible for people to enjoy. What is the benefit of it being enjoyed by one sect anyway, if that means that only one person, only this type of people a certain type of people can enjoy these cultures? And lastly, the last of the rebuttals is how cultural appropriation happens in the spectrum. Because cultural appropriation is so harmful to culture, such as the ones that does not respect religion, would still be called out anyway. There's still self-corrective mechanism in the school. Like as an example, people can still explain these arts in mainstream media, where we have leaders of the minority group explaining why they're strong, and maybe given an interview or podcast. We live in a point of internet, guys. The internet exists. That's why the tipping point of discussions exists, in which there's a lot more discussion that happens where people can actually understand each other. This is the tipping point where people understand cultures. It does not have to be formally learned in a school where you don't really focus anyway. It happens informally, instead of having one step-by-step process where we force people to learn. Instead, where we tell you that community is not that easy. Sometimes it is very vague. Sometimes it happens in these kind of situations. Sure, mistakes do happen, and there's a bullet that we are okay with accepting. Because if mistakes happen and there is self-correcting mechanism, that means that all of this is still going to be solved anyway. This is also the part of culture that we are most okay of trading off, compared to language, which is going to be changed entirely if you have this being traded off. I would rather look at Vignesh wear baju Melayu, even if he does not understand why there's 5 buttons in it. Because this means that people can be empowered, since they can create a business out of it and they can create their own bulan bintang market. If more people wear baju Melayu, I think I'm okay with trading that off, because they ran a funny argument, since you have to feel so empowered when you wear those baju Melayu. That's why you wear what you wear. But I don't think that's the case, right? Because sometimes you just wear it just for fashion sense, and I think that's completely okay if that means that people can make a living out of it. And this means that people can be more empowered, and this can put food at the end of the day during dinner. I think it's beneficial. I don't think it matters as much as long as you have money in the bank and can hear Malay sung by Nami more. This is a starting point for cultural appreciation. If people do not know about the culture, how are people ever going to accept and acknowledge the culture? Since you have to experiment in fashion and entertainment, you're less likely going to platform minority cultures in the fear of being policed. People are not going to accept the differences that you have, right? And there is a ceiling of what you can create, and at some point, you have to create an entirely new culture. As an example, in sci-fi culture, instead of maybe making a news, maybe changing something a bit, what you do is that you just simply creating an entirely new culture in order for sci-fi, instead of platforming these cultures in your fashion shows in order for you to have something new and different. At this point in time, we're just going to entrench the differences that happens between the majority and minority, but before that, sure.
If you say people are so deterred and scared to talk to each other, why does watching a Chinese movie directed by a white man or cheongsam sold on Zara become the tipping point for discourse?
I think it's okay if people do wear that, because that's why you try to understand that. And even if people do not understand them, sure, like you just, I think it's very cherry picking here, because I think at some point, some people would want to recognize all of these cultures. And secondly, if it is done wrong, people can self-correct. We can call out of these things. Ghost in the Shell was acted by Scarlett Johansson, and people called out against this movie and tell them why it is wrong. And that's why there is an incentive for producers to not do that anymore. At the point in time in which this happens, people would want to create more movies such as Crazy Rich Asians that employs a huge chunk of Asian characters, of Asian actors, in order for them to have much more business. We think that the point in which people do understand all of this and people can feel and like maybe appreciate this a little bit more, I don't think there's any harm to it. And if your case about how people just wear chomsang, people wear baju Melayu just because they feel like it, I don't think there's any harm to it. I'm willing to concede that. What more if the consolidation of power and money is more towards the majority, which means that the minority have lesser power to start a label company or a fashion which would specifically cater to your brand? Because at the point in time in which you entrench the differences between the two, is where you sideline the minorities more, and the majority would consolidate all the power and money, and they just would do and just propagate all this white culture and Malay culture instead of giving all these Indians and Chinese cultures a chance. This is the first gateway for minorities to raise out of poverty and create their own fashion labels. People can still reclaim their clothing articles after they have more power and influence. And even if this does not happen, you have influencers already doing this, talking about why certain actions are wrong. You tell people to stay, and the comparative under your side of the house is that you tell people to stay away entirely from the other culture, rather than try to make mistakes and then improve. Cultural appropriation can happen alongside unity, and it's the main goal that the government never wants to achieve and expect it to work like magic. Opposition does not do the same mistake.
Hello, so thank you, Governor Whip, for that speech. Now, I thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for that speech. Now, I'd like to invite the Governor Whip to deliver the speech. So, as always, just let me know when you're ready on the count of 3.
Hello, am I audible and visible?
Yep, you are.
Okay, let me just put my notes together. I'll accept POIs verbally, so please unmute on the POI. I'll try to accept it on the 4th minute onwards. Panel, I think side opposition is very individualistic in the actual views they want to put here, and they don't actually tell us what this appreciation looks like on their side, because it seems to be they think that anything that has to do with culture at all is under, for some reason, appropriation, and therefore we cannot defend anything like that. I think Chloe is already lined out to you in framing exactly what the distinction between appropriation and appreciation is. Although it may be a thin line, there's still a clear issue at hand here. Appreciation is one in which you actually it's controlled by the minorities themselves. Therefore, Crazy Rich Asians is appreciation because it's something that's actually put out by an Asian community. It's enforced by an Asian community, and it's the Asian community that has actually control the narratives around these things. This does not look like white people just taking something and then saying, oh, it looks cool and it looks like exotic, therefore I'm going to do it in the first place. That's what appropriation looks like. That's what side the opposition has to defend in the first place. We think they took a soft stance when they can say like, oh, Eminem counts as appropriation, or just wearing a baju Melayu and not knowing the amount of buttons is appropriation. That we say that's inherently disingenuous, and that's not what the spirit of the motion is actually about here. What else is then the issue here? I think they don't actually tell us why this matters in the first place then, but I'll get into the three main clashes then. One, about what this actually means to people then. No, about visibility. So this is, I think, the only and the main push coming from side opposition about how they get more visibility and awareness. They tell us, one, that you need a starting point for these cultures to be shown in the first place. And for some reason, that happens to be specifically appropriation in the fashion and entertainment industry. And then they say like, oh, because of this is where like you get spread awareness, and that's where you get discourse. Let's dissect this one by one and see whether it's true in the first place. Is this something that has to happen through appropriation? We tell you no, because appreciation can still happen. That's another way you can spread awareness. That's still something that people can see. That's still something they can show down the line. That's why it's very easy for us to just say that happens. But even if you want to buy the bullet and say, fine, completely none of that, we tell you that this debate is about the fashion and entertainment industry. We've already outlined to you why specifically it cannot be these places, because these are ones that are very predatory, ones that are very exploitative, and ones that are very profit incentivized. You have to understand then that there's other avenues still for you to share culture, especially in such a globalized world now, where social media is at hand. It's very easy for people to just show off their culture by showing off their daily lives or going to museums, or the spread of information is very easy. We tell you then that in terms of spreading awareness, there are other avenues to do it. Side opposition had to defend specifically not banning it in fashion and entertainment industry. We told you express reasons why these are the worst industries for you to do any sort of visibility in the first place then. We tell you the visibility then, even if you want to get more visibility, they don't explain why this actually, like how much more visibility you can get if you just include appropriation. Because insofar we tell you then that they can still have like a Chinese person like pushing Chinese culture, a Malay person pushing Malay culture, you're still likely to get a visibility in the first place. We don't tell you why opposition does not tell us why that a marginal benefit they gain from allowing appropriation actually helps the spread of awareness. But even if you want to buy them at their best case, and all those arguments you don't buy and say that, okay, they get a lot of visibility, what does this actually mean? Because when they say that they get discourse, they don't actually tell us what this discourse looks like and why it matters in the first place. Because insofar then that you're someone who probably is already curious about culture, Vignesh pointed this out, you're very likely to look for these things anyway. If you're someone who's very bigoted and therefore has your conceptions shaped by what you see, it's extremely harmful then that your starting point in your discourse is by looking at appropriations of culture. Therefore, before I enter a discourse or discussion about culture, I already have a preconceived notion and a preconceived stereotype about what these cultures look like. And it's very likely to be the exotic and exploited cultures that are pushed by your entertainment and fashion industries. Therefore, the discussions you get on your side are far more skewed insofar that these people actually think that this is what these cultures look like in the first place. But even if you want to buy that argument, then again, you don't tell us why this actually matters at all. Why would I as a Malay person actually benefit? What is the utility for me if just more people talk about my culture? I think I am more willing to care about the actual preservation of it. Therefore, I don't care if it's 10 people talking about my culture or 15 people talking about my culture. I just care that as long as they're talking about my culture, they're being respectful and being appreciative. That's what actually matters to people in the first place. So even if you want to buy their visibility argument, they don't weigh with the fact of why it actually benefits the most vulnerable minorities and why they actually care about it in the first place. Before I move on to the next class, yes, POI.
Why would you try to engage and understand with each other if every attempt is only going to mean that you are going to be served with a summon or being sued?
I don't get what that means, because I can talk to a Chinese person about their life growing up and their cultures. I won't get a summon for that. That's not cultural appropriation in fashion and entertainment. So again, you have to read the motion fully, because it includes entertainment and fashion industry. That's what opposition had to defend. We tell you they can still get exchange of culture by talking to people, especially in, as you posit, multicultural societies. It's very easy for me to just learn about Chinese culture. Instead of buying a cheongsam from Zara, I can just talk to my Chinese friend. I can talk to my Indian friend. I don't have to engage in entertainment and fashion to learn about these things when there's just so easy there. There is social media and things like that exist. I think people who on your side are very likely to not opt into this, on our side, not likely to opt into this discourse, would also not opt into this discourse on your side because they clearly don't want to in the first place then. So where does this debate actually matter? I think it's more about the representation of the culture and what is actually being pushed forward. I think on your side, insofar they don't actually tell why there's checks and balances against it, the representation of your culture is one that's likely to be unpure or likely to be exploitative and one that just paints these things in a bad light. I think you already likened it to how is it going to be then when they make a sci-fi movie and want to use a foreign culture? They'll just appropriate a culture and use it in these things to try and sell it. Sure, people are going to be like, oh yeah, they made a movie that uses Islamic elements, but insofar then that it does it in a non-respectful way. It was not consented to by the actual community that it was appropriating, is where you're likely to get harmful stereotypes then. Because I watched some sci-fi movie that they make the Islamic people look like terrorists, I'm very likely to think, okay, that's how the culture looks like in the first place. We tell you, we're clearly willing to take that trade-off by saying, okay, they don't have to be represented in media or things like that, because there are other ways for you to tell these things and push these things forward in the first place. There's already other ways in which we can show Malay culture, show Islamic culture, and there's other ways in which people can learn these things in the first place. But we tell you, even then, if you don't learn it, the whole point is about preservation, because we tell you culture is something inherently important to these minorities, because a lot of times it's only things they have, especially when you're very minor minorities, where a lot of times you've been marginalized, you don't have much economic leverage. A lot of times the only things that these people hold on to is culture, which is specifically why a lot of times the rural communities are ones that are more culturally conservative, because a lot of times these are things they value the most. They don't have much else in their lives. They don't have much else to pull them out of their way. These are the things that build communities together. When you break this and you tell these communities that this is identity that they've lived with for so long is something that can just be commodified and something that some random person from halfway across the world can just use and play with at their will, is where you completely destroy this one mechanism that these people have to actually find a sense of community. So I think the argument here is simple. You just have to weigh your arguments here, because only opposition comes out and says that, oh, you get visibility and more people know about it, but they don't tell you why it's actually important to the minorities in and of themselves. They don't tell you why the discourse actually leads to anything meaningful, insofar that these people probably wouldn't care either side. If these people do care, we tell you on our side, there's many avenues in which these people can exercise these things, just by going to a museum, just by talking to people from this culture in the first place, or just by actually supporting artists from these cultures, which still counts under appreciation. A Malay person releasing Malay music is not appropriation. That's just someone releasing their own cultural music. Those are still accessible on our side of the world. For all those reasons, only can side beside government. Thank you.
Thank you, Government Whip, for that speech. Now I'd like to invite the opposition whip to deliver the speech. So if you're ready, just let me know on the count of 3.
Okay, thank you. I will take POIs on like the 5th minute or something. All right, starting my speech in 3. Oh wait, sorry. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I thank Vignesh for giving that POI to Ihsan, because that's going to be our clear line of victory. The reason why people on OP will likely watch a Chinese movie made by a white director, or the reason why people watch Crazy Rich Asian, is because it was made and produced and it was inclusive of people who are part of the majority. People in the West watch Crazy Rich Asians because Constance Wu is American and people watch that stuff, right? People recognize Eminem because he was white. That was the introduction of white people towards black culture. Sure, like Eminem was appreciated later by the black culture, but he appropriated the culture first before he was appreciated. That is our clear line of victory, precisely because of the reason why that this motion implies that we need to include ourselves within the majority. I have 3 observations I want to make before I move on to my 2 issues. The first observation is that the motion is set up in a way where the majority of people have the most amount of wealth and power. The problem here is that we haven't heard from government as to how they want to include themselves in this culture, apart from just saying, I want to protect my culture. Second observation is this debate is about selling culture, right? Because this involves the fashion industry and the entertainment industry. It means that under their side of the house, they have to prove why individually these cultures will do well in their fashion and their entertainment industries. Again, government didn't explain how to do this. They have also yet to justify the word ban, precisely because of the fact that this is a huge legal repercussion that happened at the end of the day. The third observation I want to make is that the reason why other avenues of awareness does not work is because other avenues of awareness, like social advocacy, is not interesting enough to this majority. That's the reason why we use entertainment and fashion, because they are convenient avenues. People care more about gay rights because they watch shows like Modern Family and they see this is a heartwarming moment. At the end of the day, these are the burdens that government did not solve, and this will be fatal to their case. First issue then, on cultural preservation. I want to make a note here that cultural preservation was their one and only case on government. If we can prove how we benefit from this as well, they will lose. The framing to this issue is simple, panel. If government claims cultural preservation, then they are also sacrificing parts of their culture because they have the burden to also sell their culture. And in order for them to be successful, they have to sacrifice parts of their culture that are not deemed to be palatable towards the majority. What is the weighing here? Firstly, sure, we do agree with the trade-off that the starting point for this cultural appropriation is exploitative, but in the long run, People crave authenticity of it because authenticity is rewarded with acceptance. That's why you have white girlies correcting other white people saying, no, the correct pronunciation is not faux, it's fur. That is the kind of authenticity that they crave because they find, deem, and value all this cultural significance that they get. On the side of government, you gatekeep these cultures for yourself and for yourselves, but as society progresses, people don't see the inherent value in those culture because it is not accepted at large. Secondly, if you principally agree that culture is only for connections and only for bonds, then you cannot sell your culture as well. This is problematic because this contradicts the very burden that they have to defend at the end of the day. The conclusion to this issue is simple, panel, that when your culture has been accepted and known by the majority, that is when you try to reclaim it. Back then, people were wary of the use of dreadlocks by African Americans, but as time passes by and more people are accepting dreadlocks, that is when it's entering the spheres of fashion industry and the entertainment industry, and now it's part and parcel of like the Milan fashion show, for example, because it is considered to be a cultural heritage. And guess what? After it was popular, it was done by Black people and for Black people. These are the instances where we platform these minorities through the exploitative usages of this white majority or the majority in general. But at the end of the day, in the long run, when we have that consolidation of power towards every single minority, this is how we benefit them. Because of that, on the issue of cultural preservation, they lose out. Second issue then, on social inclusion, which is our biggest benefit. The framing for this issue is simple, panel. In building national identity, there was always going to be a dominant group anyways. In diverse America, for example, we have a plethora of race. English was the predominant language. In Malaysia, we have multicultural of races, but we still use Bahasa Malaysia, right? If anything, what we see here is riding the social capital of the majority leads your culture as well. What is the weighing here, panel? First of all, Vignesh considered that this is not important by saying, what is the value of me being an Indian man, having other people value my Indian culture? This is problematic and it kills their case, because if they were correct to point out in Chloe's speech that the rest of the majority of society, or at least the industry itself, was exploitative and racist, then the same is true for the entirety of the society as well. And it's worse because they are the majority. They hold the most amount of political wealth and power. The way we solve this, and the tipping point here, panel, is that we introduce social inclusion through appropriation because we are entering the majoritarian circle. The benefit here is precisely because of the fact that probably right now, the word of the motion implies that cultural appropriation is just very large. That means it's true. Maybe society is racist. But that in point of introduction is what led to the inclusion of a lot of minority groups at the end of the day when they are now being accepted. Before I move on to concluding my issue, I'll take a POI.
Everything that you've said as so far has already been prefaced by all of us by telling you there's other avenues of propagation. You have to deal with the fact that when you corporatize culture, you skewer the culture. Why is it still something that you can go with?
Three things. Number one, I've already said why other avenues do not work because they are boring. People care more about entertainment. Secondly, I've already told you that this motion is about selling your culture. Your side, you also have to defend selling your culture in fashion and entertainment industry. So who the hell cares about bastardizing your culture or capitalizing your culture because you have to do it anyway. But thirdly, when you capitalize or when you benefit from your own culture, what it means is that now in the future, Black people can also platform themselves as supermodels, as artists of their own culture. And that means they get to appreciate their culture, but also at the same time, they get the money for it. We are saying that this is the starting point that is important to a plethora of benefits that these minority cultures can get. The second point to this issue of social inclusion is simple, panel, that if it's true that society is bad, we have cultural advocacy. So it's people like Vanilla Ice who raps about police brutality that makes white people care about like police brutality, and that is the starting point of how people actually want to care about these minorities at the end of the day, right? The comparative on the side of government is simple. The word banning here is a strong negative word that signals other people or other culture cannot touch each other because we are special in our own way. The reason why this banning word is important, panel, is because you already signal to the rest of society of an us versus them mentality, because you can never be part of us and you can never stand us, which is what Vignesh considered earlier on, right? The problem here is that if the majority don't know what you as the minorities look like, this is where they will start shaming. Why is your sari looking this way? Why does your hair look this way? Why are you look like different from the rest of us? For all those reasons, so proud to oppose.
Well, thank you, Opposition Whip, for that speech. When I move on to the reply speech portion of the debate, to begin the reply speech, I would like to invite the opposition reply speaker to deliver their speech. Here. So, and let me adjust the timer first. Right, so for the opposition reply, just let me know when you're ready.
I am like, give me like, that's a huge bottle. Do you have the docs, Adam? Is it the docs? No. Where is my docs? Oh yeah, okay, tak apalah. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's first understand where does this debate happen. Because their claim is that it is so easy for you to understand each other's culture since you can just talk to people. Of course, maybe in Malaysia or maybe in Malaya, it's so easy for you to do that. But it's not that easy in Mara. That means that of their analysis would be true if they mean that the country is pretty peaceful and people would want to learn and people want to always learn since they always have Chinese friends. But for some people, they don't have the opportunity for them to learn from their Chinese friends since they don't have them at any of to begin with. I don't have any Chinese friends before I enter debate because then I know Chloe then. But that's not the case for every part of the world because there are extremes of cultural appropriation where people do it just because they think that it is cool. You are going to ban them instead of having more conversations and discussions regarding the fault and the mistake that they do. Secondly, this means that if they want to debate the necessity of a ban in government, they cannot have that under that particular framing because since people can just learn by talking to their friends and instead of having to go out of their way to learn about this culture, you do not need to ban it if it is so easy for you to learn. But instead, they intend to complicate the process in other situations where it is much harder for you to learn, where it is much not palatable for you to learn about the other cultures. And if there's no incentive for you to learn about the other cultures, you are going to ban the process and make it feel that everyone is scared to experiment and platform each other's culture. The point in which you are not likely to take minorities as models since people would assume it is just tokenistic. Since people assume the words of each other, people want to sue you because they want to have money. Since a blanket ban is something that they can use, they cannot defend the status quo because that is our burden. As a government, if they wanted to introduce a new thing, they would have to defend an extra layer of analysis of why this ban is necessity. Thirdly, if we're going to defend the status quo, and they also want to defend the status quo, there's no difference between us. It is a parallel debate. And what is the trend in status quo, which I think is conceded in both sides of the house? Firstly, people already have more awareness. People already talk about this, and they understand there's already internet, there's already podcast culture. If they wanted to talk about that, where people could educate and people could talk to each other. This means that you are defending the status quo, where it's safe to say that status quo is not that bad. Where we show that status quo is already improving. They are doing something so radical. Therefore, the opposition will have to prove the benefits of it. If people do not interact with each other at their point in time, is if people cannot learn about each other's culture, there's no starting point for you to learn. And especially in Adam's analysis and Aisha's analysis, where entertainment is the most palatable part of your culture, where you can spark interest. Because in other things, people are maybe it is harder for you to try because you will have, in order for you to experience your culture, you will have to eat something and put something in your body in which you do not maybe not like. But the difference with fashion is that you just have to see it, and this does not have any adverse effect towards you. This means that at this point in time, people would learn about each other better since there are more exposure, since there's more visibility. People would learn about this, and therefore this can facilitate integration by having much more conversations and the starting point for people to share their experience and their knowledge. This sparks the curiosity for people to learn because under the other of the house, what they want is a self-correcting mechanism for people to learn formally. As far as I am concerned, we are already teaching it in schools, but people do not really about it because this is not something that is closely related to them. But as long as this is something that you see on your Instagram and this is something that pops up in your FYP, because the majority with one have a lot more power and they have a lot more people doing it. Therefore, this is something that you can see. And if there are other people condemning it and talking about this culture, the discourse that happens is the point in time where you can see all of this. Our case and the mechanism for us to facilitate change is by having much more discourse and conversations. Their case only talking about to your friends, in which it is not necessarily available to everyone. The corporatization of culture, because at the end of both sides of the house, they're also defending corporatization of culture. But the only difference is that you have to understand first before you can wear a baju Melayu, before you can wear a cheongsam, and they assume that it's so easy for you to do so. At the point where they want to defend corporatization of culture, they also have to defend the harms of it. But only on the outside of the house, we explain that when there is cultural appropriation, where people are more likely to take up other cultures since you do not feel scared of it, is the point in time when you are going to embrace authenticity. You're going to embrace more more black rappers. You're going to rappers. You're going to more about whatever the things that they're rapping about. You're going to learn more about history since these are things that they are already implicitly said in their lyrics. At this point in time, unity is something that's fully claimable by side opposition. Government cannot win this debate.
Thank you, Opposition Reply, for that speech. So to close out the debate, I would like to invite the government reply to deliver the speech. So if you're ready, just let me know by the count of 3. Hello, government, are you ready?
Sorry, yeah, I am.
Right.
Yep. 3, 2, 1. It's funny that Adam talks about the rap industry and black culture when it is the biggest idea of how a culture that chooses not to appropriate itself and sell itself out to white people is one that is going to succeed, is one that is going to tell the white people that want to enter it that they need to assimilate into that culture and try to understand it. The only call out then that is problematic, and we concede is problematic, is not allowing other people to appreciate and enjoy your culture if they're willing to make these trade-offs and come from a place of true learning. We've already told you that's perfectly fine. So if Eminem wants to come in under the guidance of Dr. Dre and is someone that is continually told and is like perceived as a white person in a black person's body, we tell you that that is perfectly fine on the side of government. Not government. If you want to have Crazy Rich Asians, which is directed by an Asian director, that is perfectly fine. Both examples, which prop up a lot of the case of opposition, are the clearest distinctions of cultural appreciation as opposed to cultural appropriation, which is exclusively then why I think opposition fails in today's debate to highlight to you why appropriation and defending the avenues around it is something that is meaningfully important in the round. We win on this. 4 layers of call out. Number 1, they say on principle we cannot take the trade-off of doing other avenues because principally we don't want to sell our culture. Check your notes panel. This is untrue coming from Chloe's speech. The point of our speech is the crucial 4th piece of framing, where we tell you that the entertainment industry and the fashion industry is exclusively very, very predatory, where there's huge asymmetry of power, where it's extremely coercive, no engagement towards any of this coming from the side of opposition. They choose to cherry pick this and say there is principal inconsistency. They needed to contend with the nuance. This isn't something that we developed later on in the speech. This literally came out in first. I don't know why only Adam is dealing with it. The second thing is this response from WIP. And I want to note that a lot of these responses are coming from WIP, is that this is something that is boring. The simple response to this and the call out to this is, if you perceive a culture as boring, you needed to prove in positive analysis why the tipping point is entertainment and why the tipping point is fashion. Insofar as they never did that and never explained the nuance between appreciation and appropriation, because we can still have Crazy Rich Asians, we can still have Eminem. I don't see why this is winning from their side. The third thing is they choose to harp the case on the chat, on the one-line response that comes from your speech on how you can have friends from different cultures. That's really what you want. They then respond to this by saying some people got no friends. Number 1, even if you study in UiTM, you still have TikTok, you still have Instagram. Just go on a reel, bro. Look at an Indian talk about being Indian, bro. That's all it takes if you really want to have some level of discourse conversation. But number 2, this is the lowest barrier that we gave you within the round. Understand that a lot of our other nuances on how to appreciate culture, how to have greater amounts of discourse can still exist because we're not completely isolating ourselves from the industry. Rather, we're saying that we need to heavily revise the ways we allow our culture to be appreciated and shown on the entertainment and fashion industry scale of things. Because of that predatory nature, no engagement on this again. Opposition is on the losing side. 3 issues in the round. Number 1, representation. They say we can get black actors and black models in the industry, and then this is something that is good. But I think that the problem here is that they never explain to us why this is something that can be manifested to the truest extent why it can never be about the black person representing their culture and not a wishy-washy trade-off that panders to the white people in Texas. We tell you already that when you always have to sell, you are never going to get this outcome. You are never going to get crazy rich Asians if you didn't have Asian people continually fighting for this thing day to day about how they wanted more representation and how they didn't like it when Nicki Minaj wore chopsticks in the Chun-Li video. The second thing is on should we ban. They say we don't prove the burden. What do we offer to you? We offer to you the frame that the fashion and entertainment industry is exclusively exploitative. We offer you arguments that this is something that goes against cultural purity. We tell you that these people are willing to trade off and have shown principally time and time again that if it comes at the cost of their own culture, they will forego material gain. For these three reasons, I think the ban is perfectly justified within this. But even if that is true, they needed to justify it to a greater extent and actually engage with the mechanisms that we gave you. The third thing is on other avenues. They say boring. We say, number one, we already explained why even if it's boring and you get no buy-in whatsoever, that's fine. At least your culture is preserved. You're happy. You can find other avenues of making money. It doesn't matter. Second thing is like, they just sell to like that's it. Proud to propose.
Thank you, Governor Reply, for that speech. That marks the end of the debate. The judges will now make the decision on the side who that wins the debate. We'd like to thank everyone for the rounds. So we'll mark 10 minutes to allow the judge to make a deliberation for the oral adjudication. So for now, the contestant may stand by while I invite the judges into the break rooms.